Alright guys, welcome back after a hard crash.
It wasn't me.
Matt all forgot to install the cores on his phone, so he didn't have any tether.
But we've been joined in a quite a little channel by the ever illustrious Apothne.
Hi.
Hello. Have you been reading / following what this new magical Eve browsertron is, or is it all about?
Insofar that I logged into the stream like 5 or 10 minutes ago, and thus have had your guys' take on it. But yeah, playing Eve in browser as like a lowering the barrier of entry point to having some form of interaction with the game seems valid and logical. And further, I look forward to the inevitable. If it is like time capped, if you get like 20 minutes and then you have to download the browser, I'm looking forward to the inevitable like speed runs of EVE Online, where it's like, how much money can you scam in 20 minutes? And like people then scamming the leaderboards and pretending to scam someone that's actually their ult, or like how many light years can you get from the system the browser spawns you in your 20 minutes, like that.
You can tell that Apothne has played Eve for a bit, because he's already thinking about how we're going to break something that's just about to come out.
Well, is speedrunning breaking it?
No, the scamming and the abusing of a new feature, that's pretty much what Eve players do, right?
Very true. Yeah, just to review before we move on. So we're talking about the new article released by CCP Dopamine, who's in the chat. Hello, Dopamine. Referring to a new experimental way that they're going to try running the Eve client, which is going to be in your browser. So the details we have so far is essentially you'll be able to I got distracted, sorry. You'll be able to, the first time you register your character, you will potentially, I'm not sure what the criteria is, but you will be dropped in to playing the game immediately from within your browser. This will be a time-limited session. And based off all the information that we can put together, this is not a conversion of Eve to run in a browser. This is more of a Google Stadia, GeForce Now streaming service style system. So you will be able to instantly play the game. For this experiment, it's really interesting. It's all about skipping the roadblock of having to download the client for the first time. But it opens a door for all kinds of wild and wacky things in the future. But just my opinion on it, it seems pretty airtight. For those that are worrying about botting and cheats and whatever else, don't worry about it. I think this is going to be fine.
I would just like to point out to Dopamine that I would pay more Plex or subscriptions for a tablet version of my markets. Thank you very much.
But you wanted to talk about... Sorry, Apothne, go ahead.
I was going to ask, are we allowed to be pessimistic on this show?
Yes, if it's moderate. No calling names, and I think Matterall is introducing a rule: no cursing and swearing and stuff.
So CCP as a company does something I admire very much, in that they often try to be early adopters and are very ambitious with new ideas and trying new features. That said, often there's like this new feature that looks cool and has potential, and then it's like 75% built, and it gets to the point of like nearly working, and then we move on to the next thing. And like, I'm not saying that's going to happen to this one, but this seems like a feature that is like a prime candidate for that treatment. I absolutely hope that it all goes well and it goes fantastic, but I'm just you know, as a member of the parish now, of the Eve community, as an elder statesman, if you will, it is somewhat my responsibility to look at the annals of history.
You're not going to mention all the examples of CCP jumping on something that could be cool, and then 75% in, okay, not that cool.
I'll drop on that I think this is a system that is so low technical investment that I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised of how well it works. The only crux it's got is how much server capacity do they throw at it, not TQ server capacity. Server
And
capacity for the streaming clients, and how
quickly
performant
will
they
it
end up
melt
being.
your Chrome browser?
Well, if you can watch YouTube in 1080, I think you'll be fine. As Dopamine said, they've been testing it with 60 FPS, 1080p in a browser. Though there's an asterisk of dependent on your internet connection, which for me confirms it's a streaming service. I don't think it's going to bother your browser to the point that you'll be able to run it on near enough any old device that's got a browser.
I really think that he should give us some dank leaks of demonstration of this thing working in-house, just so we have a little bit of an idea what it actually is.
Go on YouTube, type in Eve PvP, and then just pretend to click on the things while you watch the video, and then there you go.
I do that
just
all
like
the
watching
time.
Garmin videos.
I try to drag the perspective on Twitch quite often, just because I'm watching it and thinking that it's actually my own client.
Just Dopamine responded to one of your statements, Apothne, but you have to remind me what statement it was. I've lost track.
Oh, I just talk a lot of rubbish, so I wouldn't.
I see. It's a reply to your. Yes, sometimes you get sort of not half baked, but 90% baked features that then turn out to not quite be what we wanted. But I think it's a test feature, and as Dopamine says, it's just a test. They're just experimenting. It's not some mega feature that has got all the plans in the world behind it.
Yeah, in which case, love testing cool things, and all the love in the world to CCP devs, both those I've hung out with and not hung out with. So best wishes to that stuff. I didn't want to seem like I was attempting to urinate on your festival.
Just to catch people up on who Apothne actually is, would you give a little bit of an intro, Apothne, of what you've actually done in EVE Online, aside from, of course, putting Grath on D&D teams with other EVE nerds?
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it as short as possible because it's really not that interesting. So I made my account in 2010, milled around in HiSec, didn't really like the game, didn't really get it. Then in 2012, I gave it another go, and then I got really invested, which I think is like change the dates, and that's a pretty classic Eve starter story. Joined Eve Uni, got into fleet commanding, ended up being their main, if not one of their main, if not their main FC there. Then moved into Snigwaffer, and then moved into Pandemic Legion for a while before I kind of fell out of playing maybe 2 years ago. And then I did some skirmish FCing in PL, but around that time I got more and more involved in kind of the Eve media verse. So I wrote a lot of articles for Crossing Zebras. I appeared on, co-hosted, and made a bunch of different Eve shows to talk about different things, mostly to do with fleet meta, CSM, Alliance tournament. I was fortunate enough to be invited to be one of the commentators for Alliance Tournament 12. So I did 12 and 13 in Iceland. And then I was fortunate enough to be, I think, possibly the first ever player host for the Alliance Tournament. And then I did that in some capacity for ATs, I think 14 through 16, which was obviously the last Alliance tournament. And yeah, I just like hanging out with my friends who enjoy spaceships. I also did the Alliance panel one time. And yeah, I also ran for CSM 11. I think if I hadn't pulled out due to ill health, I would have been third after Hyde and Arith, which is pretty cool. I might be forgetting something, but yeah, that's a reasonable summary, I hope.
We were
Indeed, it
fortunate
is.
enough to
And
be a
just on
part
a
of.
personal note, it was Apothne and Jintan that made me really hype about watching the NT. Not that I ever understood what was going on, but it was at least entertaining.
Yeah, so EVENT is the organization that were basically like the production company that took more and more of those roles over from CCP with regards to the Alliance tournament, and they are actually starting up a new tournament as a hark back to the old Alliance tournament. For those of you who have missed that, which the teams have literally just been announced for, so lots of practicing is going on. It's got a really cool rule set, and you'll be able to watch those matches in I think it's about 2 months. The 2 weekends. I think, if I remember correctly, it's end of October.
And the important part for me is, so now we have those 25 teams, and I expect most of them are pretty much similar to what they usually are. But who's going to be commentating, and will we be seeing you appearing at all?
In terms of the team composition, it's really interesting. You do have a lot of old hands, but from what I've seen, you have a lot of people who were interested in the Alliance tournament or were like new members on old teams or were members of kind of the round of 64, round of 32, round of 16 teams that have gone, okay, this is my opportunity to start my own team and get involved and do the Alliance tournament my way. So there's a lot of new blood, or like people taking up what was previously old guard olds, which is really, really nice. In terms of the commentators, I don't believe there's been an official announcement about that to the best of my knowledge, so that is not something I can divulge at this time.
Sneaky. No confirmations, I see. So that was the plug for EVENT and the upcoming tournament. To get back on some of the stuff that we're talking about right now, we are still looking at the Eve in a browser topic and expecting some more comments on that. I would like to ask Convict, because he's in chat. Since we didn't get a fan fest, so we didn't get the year in review, could you maybe do a year in review stream so we actually know what happened this year? Because that's usually one of those things that makes me a little bit excited again about EVE Online, even though I'm usually fatigued before we hit FanFest. But when we see all the stuff that has been actually done over the year that we've been playing, it's kind of encouraging that EVE is always new and never really completely stagnating or stale.
While Convict answers, if I can galaxy brain for a moment, you know how Eve Echoes is the new hotness when it comes to Eve Mobile? If you can play Eve in browser, I can open Google Chrome on my phone. I can play main Eve on my phone if this thing comes through, right? Is that not accurate?
Yeah. Well, theoretically, it would need a bit more work because, as mentioned, this is most likely only going to be available for the first hour of play, maybe, and not really for everyone. But it does have the theoretical possibility of doing another R&D thing and give you at least some of the aspects of EVE Online available on your phone.
I mean, hey, as I said before, I have a strong faith in the EVE Online player base to figure out exactly how much ISK you can extract in a single hour of playtime.
Not much. I'm pretty sure that's not much.
Yeah, but you're rich, Caleb.
Once you catch
So I
up,
Perhaps
don't count.
how much grief you can cause in a single hour of
But
playtime.
that's a completely different metric, right? You can cause a lot of grief in an hour. There are many ways to cause grief in EVE Online, even with an alpha.
Many players manage to do it without even logging in.
Yeah, and I would just like them to consider, if we get a bit of an upgrade to PI, maybe with some of the good stuff from what Echoes is doing and some of the better stuff about what the dream originally was, I am definitely going to give it another try with PI, because admittedly, even though I was the biggest fan of the feature when it was introduced or announced, when I actually saw what it entailed, I must admit I have not touched it since it was brought into the game, ever.
So, what's Apothne missed?
See, that's why I said to Convict that he needs to do the year in review as a stream, maybe with a bit of historical years in review past, so we can look at all those nice videos and see how far we actually got. Because I don't even remember what we've gotten this year. Well, we've got the storms. Did you see the storms, Apothne?
So, as I'm classing myself as a brand new player now. You know, I'm a newbie to modern Eve, you might say. So I have done an official application to join Eve University so I can learn about the game. From my understanding, from their excellent wiki, some of the things I have missed include a massive, big old new Triglavian Dreadnought that looks absolutely badass, but is probably prohibitively expensive for practical day-to-day use. But I don't care; it looks so cool. I want one. Also, there appear to be these Edencom ships, which are like chain lightning sorcerers from Diablo 2, but they apply using missile maths, so they're not really worth flying.
Well, you also missed one of my highlights this year is when I had to eat my hat on stream about something that I said to Ashtarothi a while back, because that whole Triglavian invasion thing actually ended up being not only newsworthy, but very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. One of the things I've been doing since my break from Eve is I've really gotten into the LARPing world, which has always had this really weird place adjacent to Eve Online. If you remember I remember CCP Seagull had some links to LARPing, and also they had those LARPers come in for FanFest. I want to say 2016, but I could be very well wrong.
17.
And I'm kind of tempted to have Apothne in like Eve University and hang out with friends and chill and fly some spaceships and stuff. But I'm also kind of tempted to make like a hardcore RP character. And so, and then my reasoning for this is kind of like so one of the issues, not an issue, one of the things I always had about Eve Online is that Eve is a game that many people take to kind of the ultimate levels of min-maxing and efficiency and how do I achieve my goals? What is the optimal way to achieve my goals in game? And that is an extraordinarily valid playstyle, and many people do it. But it does result in um, sometimes gameplay that is less fun. So a lot of people complain about the blue donut. Some people complain about different fleet doctrines. Well, it's the best way to do this thing, but it sucks, and we want CCP to change it so that the best thing is the most fun thing, right? But I figure if you just role play hard enough, like that gives you so much freedom to throw that out of the window. Like if I decide I want to be a like a Minmatar loyalist and only fly Minmatar ships and invade the Imperium with exclusively Minmatar ships because I perceive that the Imperium has been anti-Minmatar rights or whatever. I'm just picking, factions out of nowhere. Then like I'm gonna lose and I'm gonna die every time. But like the joy comes from the story rather than from making the numbers look better. And that's something I really came to appreciate a lot more from going more into the LARP world, and then kind of coming back and viewing Eve in a new way.
But if you think about it, right, if you go back to the early days of Eve, where you, of course, weren't around back then, but there was a lot more interest in actually doing hardcore RPing and all of that stuff, right? This is when we had groups like Usher Khan in their hardcore RP mode, and everyone was kind of doing it initially, and then it's just started degrading a bit. It became not worth it, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that CCP was still learning how to actually run something like this, because it's very different to an on rail like thing, or where you control all the narrative. And eventually in what was it, 12 or something, I think CCP kind of, well, you can call it caved in, but acknowledged that it's the players that create the narrative in the game. So instead of being something like a pre-designed narrative of a LARP or a classic tabletop pen and paper, right? it became something more like an ad hoc learn while you do it kind of game mastering mode, where they have to respond to the player base all the time. And I think we're seeing a resurgence of RP. I think there's a lot more interest in it now. And I think the Triglavian thing, even though I was not a fan initially, has actually helped that along the way, because some of the choices you make based on RP-like arguments is kind of showing that it matters. And if we move into more of that in the future, I think RP will be very popular, and that means that the LARPing also becomes more popular.
Yeah, I think that's I definitely agree with that, and I think the modern world of LARPing and a lot of tabletop systems released since probably like the mid 2000s, late 2000s, has lent more into that, where it's less here is a very rigid story and kind of the Curse of Strahd module sense, although those do still exist. It has been more here is a framework for the world. Here is some plot seeds, but then the game masters or the people running the LARP kind of then have a feedback loop where they give a bunch of things to the players. The players go and do a bunch of stuff with it, and then the people who run the game, be that CCP or the game organizers or whatever, then go, okay, they've done this thing. How does this permanently affect the part of the world that the players do not directly control, that either through tools or things that we can't let the players control, right? So one of the really interesting things I found from playing Eve is that you were always on this really weird blurred line between what is RP and what isn't, which I found very different. So like playing Apothne, that to all intents and purposes, that is just me. That's just me as a human being. In terms of my beliefs and playing the game. Apothne isn't a character for me so much as it's just who I am in the game and what I do. And there's always kind of this blurred line. And I think that's one of the reasons controversial figures like, say, Mittani as the prime example, and he comes from a LARP background. I don't know if that influenced it. Obviously, you'd have to have him on the show and ask. It's like there are some people who play the game where them playing the game is more or less themselves playing the game, whereas there are some people who put on characters, but because there's that gray line, it leads to much more emotional bleed, where you don't know if that person is actually really an asshole or if they're an asshole in game, or alternatively if they're a mean person playing a nice person, and I much prefer a much clearer line between nowadays between this is who I am in real life and this is specifically the character I'm playing, and that line is always very blurry for me and Eve, because obviously all approaches to that are valid. If I wanted to, I could have my real name as my character name, and I could go, this is just me in spaceships, and then on the other side of that, we're all to an extent role playing. Like, we're not actually flying a spaceship. Grath Telkin was not actually the CEO of a real corporation. So it's this very interesting spectrum of the extent to which we RP, but also the extent to which we recognize that we're RPing. For a long time, I know, especially while I was playing, people kind of looked down on RPers, which I always thought was a bit mean. Like, oh, they don't play the game properly, in inverted commas. They're filthy RPers. Like no, it's a game.
Why
You
are
have to
you
play it how
taking
you want. It's your
notes?
money.
And you should be filling out your spreadsheet, right?
Yeah, like you could have made 10 mil more risk on that transaction if you hadn't done X and Y. But it's your money. You get to define the parameters, your own play style, as long as it's within the game rules as laid out by CCP.
And I think, as you know, I wrote about exactly this weird gray zone that you're talking about. And I think it's interesting to see how people slowly discover that they have been involuntarily RPing for years without really knowing it, right? It's this, because you can't really bring the same attitude. It's a bit like everyone in real life adapts to the environment they're in. So they're going to be a little bit different personality wise, depending on what groups they're associating with, right? And in Eve, this is just taken to the max. When you play Eve, you bring completely different aspects of your personality to the game, to the way you interact with the other players. And of course, it's going to be a version of you, but it's an extremely extrapolated version of you, right? It takes so many of your emotional things to the next level, because everything is this rather serious sandbox universe where everything you do and say kind of matters in one way or another. Hell, even if you're just in your venture mining 1 unit of tritanium, that actually has a game impact on the whole ecosystem. If you then also start smack talking in local, you're also making a social impression of some sort, right? So it's never meaningless. And this is why I think CCP sometimes forget what a weird and strange place it is that they're actually governing, because I have never had a similar experience in another game, not even remotely.
I would contend that at least of the CCPers I have spoken to, none of them are under any illusion how weird the EVE Online like player base and like just the whole situation, shall we say, the EVE Online. It's like none of them are under any illusion as to what a weird and wonderful place we inhabit in the internet and in the world.
I was more thinking about the uniqueness of the actual Eve thing. If you take away all the re and the sold and all that stuff, the way that you play this game is so different from the way that, well, at least it's different from the way that I play any other game. It's almost like an antithesis. It's like the complete opposite. In other games, I tend to pretty much ignore what everyone is doing, not really want to stick my nose out, not really want to socially engage or learn to interact with other people. I'm just usually with a few friends and just trying things out, right? But when it comes to Eve, it's almost the opposite. I am curious about what's happening pretty much everywhere and what weird stories people have, especially if they have some of those secret ones that usually are only whispered about at FanFest drunk meetups and stuff like that, right? It's just such a strange experience, and I think that is what at least keeps me playing, because I can't get that kick anywhere else. Maybe I
I
could
think
get it
that
at
might be a
LARPing.
you thing more than specifically. Like I've certainly played other games where I've had that similar feel of wanting to know what's going on everywhere, and I think it might be partially to do with the inherent game design of how much you rely and how much other people's decisions affect you. And in some games, that's very toned down, and in some games, that's really toned up. So in his example, like I found I had a very big Eve feel when I started going to the Empire LARP, that is like the biggest fest LARP in the UK. So it's like 2,500 people in a field for a weekend, and there were so many commonalities, so many parallels from my time playing Eve and entering that game as someone still relatively new to LARP and somebody brand new to the system, that I just find that very interesting, because obviously in terms of medium, they're entirely different. You know, they're 22,000 people in person in a field compared to, you know, however many people you're playing with in your standard fleet battle or your market trading or whatever, from your computer at home. But on a game design level and in a game experience sense, there are so many things that are very similar and that evoke a similar response in me that Eve did.
Chat is saying at least it's not a vampire LARP. Well,
Yeah, I run one of those. That the Vampire LARP is the first one I went to.
and to be fair, there's a lot of aspects in EVE Online that resembles vampire LARPs. Not going to lie.
Yeah, I'm aware that I've taken the conversation somewhat more abstracted from news of the week, for which I apologize if that's what people are there for.
Oh, this is great.
Well, I think it's important because I think we can expect more of this, and I think that's why it's valid to talk about it, because if CCP are moving into more of this type of content and are getting better at this whole lore thing, I think they've really improved on it lately, because it's not easy to run something like lore and
Sorry, if
base
I
your
can
back.
interrupt very briefly, Caleb. If you're going to put up pictures of LARPing on the screen, can you put up ones that don't make LARP look really bad?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Like, give me 1 sec. I'll give you a link to a really good place where there's some amazing pictures. Sorry, Caleb. Please continue.
No, it was just the fact that I've not been interested in lore for a long time in EVE Online, because I started out kind of going hardcore role play with Caleb, right? And the whole Intarchy and the background story and writing my whole corporation thing, all of that stuff. I did exactly the same as everyone did back then, but I completely left it alone when it didn't really have the value and people didn't really want to do it anymore. I think that was around 06 or 07. I think maybe that's one of the downsides about what happened with some of the groups that came into Eve, that kind of poo-pooed on it. So I left it alone. But with what's been happening lately, it's moving into those things where I actually want to read the lore again. And it's just, how do they square that weird circle of not trying to put me or force me into rails or into some direction, but still follow a meaningful story? And I think they did really well with Triglavians. I don't know how much you've actually followed it, Apothne, but it's been kind of interesting, especially because I've had access to so many experts that's told me what exactly is going on, so I didn't have to like read all the details. And I'm just looking forward to the conclusion of this whole Triglavian invasion narrative, because, well, I keep saying that it's going to be Jita before Christmas because that's what it seems to be hinting at, and Ashtarothi agrees with me, and some old veterans like ER0X agrees with me. So it's not that weird and crazy an idea, and I do think that that would be a nice crescendo and conclusion to the whole thing, right? And then on the other side, what's going to be the new story? Because maybe we go back to the old original Empire's lore stuff, right? And get some designs around that again.
Yeah, I mean, so the Triglavian stuff was coming in, before I took my break from playing. The Triglavian ships, the first round of them were the new hotness at the last Alliance tournament I hosted, and they were a really big part of the meta. And that is so that's a kind of one of the classic ways of introducing plot into your role-playing game, which is kind of give the players a mystery and just kind of feed them more bits over time that they can poke and interact with, and then you slowly ramp it up to this big thing, and it's all about kind of building hype and giving people's mysteries to solve. And I did really enjoy kind of CCP really getting their dungeon master's hat on, if you will. That's certainly not the only way to put stuff in game, but I think that based on my experience of the Eve community is a way that resonated and worked really, really well. And it was really nice to see CCP put a bunch of time into that aspect of the game.
And of course, chat is going crazy with talking about the Jove and reminding us that that used to be a thing. I don't know how they would reintroduce Jove stuff into the narrative, because I seem to remember that they kind of yanked them out.
So one thing I have learned from my LARP experience that is applicable here is that while there are some things that your game runners, so CCP or people who are on LARPs, they will just have some things where, no, this is part of the backstory, we don't want to touch it, it just exists because it needs to for the damn game to work, okay? But there are some things where enough players interact with it, there will inevitably be more plot there. So if a bunch of players decided that they were going to do things in game that interact with Jove things, that people write about Jove things, people roleplay Jove things, people go shoot Jove ships, like like game design in terms of kind of modern roleplay is so much directed by, as we were talking about before, player engagement. So you give all the players this world, this set of things they can interact with, and the things that players really take hold of, that's the thing that you develop. That's the thing where you go, okay, this is the thing that the players really care about and the players are investing into. And then if at all possible, you want to give the players a payoff for that. You have narrative investment should result in narrative payoff. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you did a bunch of Jove stuff, here are some brand new Jove ships for you. It might be you did a bunch of Jove stuff, now the Jove are pissed and they're leaving the solar system forever. But whatever it is, it will drive that emergent story forward. So if you want more of a thing in the game, do that thing, and more game will exist around you. And then that's not just from CCP side either. So when I first joined EVE University back in end of 2012, there was this fleet called Noobs on Patrol, right? And it was designed so that somebody who'd never been on a fleet before, had only been on a couple of fleets, you could go out on a fleet and you did a kind of little loop through LowSec. It was really chill. So it was like my second or third day in EVE Uni. I signed up to this Noobs on Patrol fleet, and I was like, oh my god, fleets in EVE Online are the coolest goddamn thing ever. This is so cool. I love this. I want to do more of this. When is the next one? Is there one later tonight? Is there one tomorrow? And they're like, oh, we're so glad you enjoyed it. Do come along same time next week. And I was like, oh, well, hold on there. I'm not waiting until next week. And then that started me running I think I averaged running 2 fleets every 3 days for the following 3 months, because I was like, but fleets are cool, therefore I want more of it. And then by me running more fleets and me being more passionate about wanting more fleets to happen, the number of fleets run in the university, not just from the ones I run, but from other people who wanted more stuff, massively improved. So again, it's just the reinforcement of the thing. Like, the things you do in game will cause more things within the sphere that you are doing to happen, outside of special circumstances like CCP deciding to remove that aspect of the game or whatever. But the point is um, to an extent, you have a great deal of control of the type of the quantity and quality of the game that you play in games like EVE Online, with that role-playing aspect, with that massively multiplayer aspect.
There you are. We got a picture of Apothne up now.
Wow.
Oh,
nice
that's
one.
from the wedding shoot I did with my partner. We were hired to be models for a wedding company. And yeah, that's me in a suit.
I'm curious, if you start doing hardcore RP when you kind of roll back into EVE Online, what are you going to play, and are you going to get Magic Hands to play as well?
I don't think we'll see Magic Hands in EVE. Caleb is referencing my partner. She has so many other hobbies that she wants to put time into and can't. I think so. Currently, my interest in EVE is I've rejoined EVE Uni. I want to relearn some stuff. I'm gonna interact with the EVE-NT tournament in some way, and basically just see old friends. Because my life has kind of stabled down after finishing uni. I'm in a full-time job now, so I kind of have a stable point where I can build from. And then if I do decide to put more time into EVE, then I haven't really decided specifically which faction I'd be interested in. But the way I tend to roleplay characters is I try to give myself a very easy time doing so, in that I will create a character where their next step in any situation is obvious. And one of the great things I advise to anyone playing EVE with a character, whether it's hardcore roleplay or not, or if you do tabletop or other roleplay games, is have a character with a goal that you can always progress but will never achieve. Or a goal that if you do achieve it, the point of the character does not cease to exist. So my first LARP character was a very angry old Roman vampire who really hated a faction called the Carthians. Now, the Carthians were never going to be removed from the game. They're a fundamental faction of the game. And that meant there were always Carthians for him to be angry at. Something unexpected happens, he's angry at the Carthians. So in the same way, if I make a character, I might make, a Kaldari character who is really upset with the Galente, that classic Kaldari Galente faction warfare, and they will be absolutely committed to winning the war zone within the parameters that they believe is correct. So I mentioned before, maybe they only fly Kaldari ships. Maybe they will fly any ship and not do that, but have some just something that makes the game interesting and prompts interesting theory crafting. So also when I used to play the game, I always hated flying the Flavor of the Month ship. I hated Ishtars. In fact, I wrote I think it was like at least a 10-part series on how much I hated Ishtars when they were the hotness. And I was always far more interested in running my own doctrines that were custom designed for what I wanted to use them for, but also that people were less used to seeing, unless you came at them with a bit unexpected. So if you go back to the era of the Drake, classic era in EVE Online, everybody at the time knew exactly how much Drake Alpha you needed to kill, whatever, how it applied to something, what the Drake range was, all that. Like just anybody who ran fleets at the time knew exactly how and why the Drake worked, which made it, for me, just very, very dull. So by flying ships that are outside the meta, you are technically flying something worse, but you are then working in a space with more unknowns. And I think that games that are already solved are far less interesting. So if you are flying a ship where your opponent is less familiar to it, and they're also flying a ship your opponent is familiar with, there is no automatic optimal thing. Like if I'm flying a doctrine that everybody knows back and forward, and my opponent is flying a doctrine that everyone knows back and forward, there is a series of optimal choices, and basically you are just going through formalities after you undock with some, skill checks, some things, but so much of the game is then solved, and there are so many questions that you don't need to ask that it's already done. Whereas if I'm flying whatever I decided and you're flying whatever you decided, it'd be like, oh, this is that ship. It's not necessarily a standard fitting. It's not necessarily a standard usage in this case. What are the potential possibilities that it could be fit that way? How might it be correct for me to try to engage that? And it also means your opportunity for engagement window increases, right? Because if you're flying a fleet comp and your opponent's flying a fleet comp, and you both know each fleet comp inside out, unless you're very, very lucky, there should be a winner, right? If it's numbers, if it's a hard counter, whatever, you kind of know who's going to win that fight. But again, if you introduce that variability, then neither of you know as much whether you're going to win. And, FCs who are kind of not necessarily relying on I must win this because it's a big strategic objective, want to give their fleet members fun. So increasing that window in which both sides are willing to engage means you get more engagements, and everybody involved has more fun. And again, this is only my personal thing. Like for some people, that is the least fun because they love their min-maxing, they love strat ops and all that stuff, and that is fine. And I absolutely want you to play Eve the way you love it. But that attitude and that philosophy with regards to playing Eve is what I would want to focus on when I come back in.
That sounds amazing, and especially the part where you almost defined the original premise of EVE Online, that the goal of finishing and reaching end level is impossible, because that's especially what it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, it was like, I have won the game when I've got my Titan and I'm in this high level corp. Like there were so many people in Snigwaffer who they're like, I've joined Snigwaffer to be the recruitment corp for PL, which is more what it was back then. And then my goal is to get good enough and to make friends in that community and get into PL. And then they did it, they graduated, they got into PL, and they had nothing left to do because they'd achieved their goal, and everything they'd worked for, that they'd enjoyed working for, was done. And then the activity levels of people who were mega active in Waffles a week or two after joining PL just dropped off a cliff edge, because they had set that as this goal for them, which was an achievable goal. And it's not a bad goal to have, but it should be a goal that begets another goal. So when I wanted to join PL, I wanted to get into PL so that I could become a better FC. And my goal was always kind of becoming a better theory crafter and becoming a better FC. And if you'll notice, that's a goal that is never attainable. Being the best FC in the game and being the best theory crafter in the game, not only is it unattainable, it's also a goal that's constantly getting further away from you as the game changes, as fleet comps change, and nobody's ever going to achieve that. So that's why that is a better fundamental goal rather than a more transitory goal of get into this corp, get this ship, which should be progress goals. Like they are milestones rather than destination.
Were you
So
nervous?
maybe we should transition to
1 second. Were you nervous when they took this picture?
That was 2017. No, I am very fortunate that I haven't ever really been anxious when casting Eve. I have a background in performance arts. I don't think I was even nervous when I went on stage to do the MR championships. There's other stuff, but I think it's just excitement. Like I really loved all my casting and the hosting I did of the Alliance tournament. It was a really good experience, and it combines a lot of things I enjoy doing. So the performing arts, the EVE Online. I'm a mastery player. Like people often talk about what type of games, explorers, mastery players. Like it was, and like I enjoy, as you can tell, going on and on about things that I'm passionate about, right? So like I only have like positive memories from the AT stuff. I don't remember ever having any really rough times, apart from probably the main exception is the downtime. So during and after I had a really bad diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome, more medical term like encephalitic I get tired really easily. Basically, I have less energy, and when I run out of energy, it's gone. So on those AT weekends in Nottingham, I would give everything I had as much as possible for the cast. And then when everybody would go to the pub and go out for pizza, I would go straight from the room to my hotel room and just crash for the night. Because A, my body wouldn't let me do basically anything else. And B, if I didn't, I would be useless the following day. And it's like there were 1 or 2 FanFest. I remember I was crashing on the sofa of a wonderful CCP dev who I love but shall remain unnamed. And I would go to like the seminars for the day. I'd go to the talks. I'd hang out with my friends in like the morning and afternoon. But then I just wouldn't have it left in me to continue socializing into the evening. So I think that's the only negative I remember from all of that stuff. The negative being that I missed hanging out more with people I like.
So, okay, it wasn't nerves then. It was fatigue.
Oh, I was super nervous before my first AT. Actually, I take it back, because I applied to be a commentator as a bit of a joke. Like I'd done a bit of casting in StarCraft 2, but I'd watched the last Alliance tournament, and that was my entire experience. But then I got the gig, so I spent like 3 months in a mad panic doing as much homework as possible. I think I might still have it. I have like a 64 A4 thin line double side document of just everything I could possibly learn about the Alliance tournament, so that when I went in, nobody wants to be the person that very clearly doesn't know what they're talking about. And if they don't know what they're talking about, they don't know how to talk about things they don't know how to talk about. Like by the time I got there, I wasn't an expert, but I'd done enough work to at least not say something really stupid that would piss people off, and to know my place in the room. And then later in my casting career, when I did have more of that expertise, I was never necessarily an amazing theory craft or an amazing pilot, but I knew enough of the Alliance tournament to play that expert role more in terms of the meta shifts and ships and all that stuff. So it's a lot of self-knowledge solves nervousness.
So you did the equivalent of I'm not a real doctor and I just play one on TV.
Yeah, and then I played one on TV long enough to pick up a few things.
I think that's how the doctor in one of those CSI like things actually became a doctor. And we should maybe segue to talk a little bit about cores. I don't know if you've actually read up on what is happening with structures at all, Apothne, and whether you have any thoughts on it, because we've been exploding for the past 2-3 days now about it.
I would love to play the audience representative in the panel and have you explain it to me.
But it's such an old concept that you should be able to pick it up without me explaining it to you. It's basically cores. It's a revamp of CCP Soundwave's old cores in Titans thing. Just now we're putting them in structures.
Well, explain it though. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's basically to put an incentive into the structures, something that can be a conflict driver. At least that's one of the goals.
Caleb, start with what it is and then explain what it's for.
Well, it's this some law stuff core that you have to install into your structure to actually get it to online your basic services like tethering, ship module repairs, ship fitting, and all that stuff. Without this core, you will not have this, and you will not have any timers for your defense and anything of that sort. So basically, your structure is neutered until you actually install this thing.
And is the core droppable loot if you go and blow it up?
Yes. That's the whole point. The point is that it's adding an extra cost and more risk, so you won't do the 69, 69, 69 thing that is pretty much become like a standard thing of just spamming Astrohuses everywhere in space to make your enemy deal with it. Structure spam has been a massive problem, and proliferation of structures has gone a little bit nuts. Again, there's many reasons for this, and we don't need to go into all of those details. But the point is that people are doing this, and structures have proven themselves to be fundamentally too cheap. So this abuse is some of the things that they want to fix. So they want an incentive so people actually attack these structures and get some sort of bacon when they push the button. And they want people to not be able to just throw them down anywhere in massive amounts. As this design idea that came out, it does resolve that. But there's just a lot of secondary effects that have been discussed back and forth, and I think this ended up being somewhat of a threat node on the Evo forums. I don't think I've seen a 1200 post threat node for quite a while.
I mean, so there are a couple aspects of that I find really interesting. In that, as you know, Caleb here probably knows better than certainly than me. Having ISK as a lever to limit something in Eve merely delays the problem. People will get rich enough to spam things. Like, weren't Titans and super carriers only supposed to, only a couple people will have these, until it's like, yeah, kind of everyone farms them up now. And then I would worry about the cores becoming a barrier to entry. So if I'm a small group, what activities require me to have an Astrahus that I need an Astrahus to really do, and then how big is that initial ISK investment, and then balancing that against how easy they are to spam.
I think it's
and
funny
then there's
that
the making things easier for smaller people always makes things even more easier for bigger people is the classic argument against that. But then also one of the things that I would really value about citadels, and this lever kind of fluctuated throughout the time I played, and it was also an interesting lever on POSes, which of course citadels primarily replaced, was the level of the size of engagement you need to have with them. So you do not want your Astrahus to be able to, you do not want your Citadel to be able to be knocked over by two guys in half an hour, right? Like that would be a bad Citadel. You want people to have, if you've got a big expensive structure, people should have to put big effort into actually blow it up. But at the same time, you do want there to be some form of engagement that isn't completely destroying it, such that a skirmish gang has something to poke to force a response from invaders. So that was really nice when you could turn off what was it? What do you call them? Turn off services. That was really cool. And I also really liked the you remember those bubbles? I assume they're still in the game. They're bubbles where if you rat, they get tags in them and you have to go and collect your tags. I stole so many tags and got chased through so many systems. It was great. I stole like 5 billion from initiative in like half an hour one day. It was so good.
I think you're talking about the ESS, right?
Yeah, ESS, that's it.
Yeah, and that's
so
potentially
the
coming in
cores,
permanent.
So the cores to me sound like the larger end of that spectrum. And I'm just wondering, that sounds good, assuming the barrier of entry to structure usage for cool gameplay for smaller groups isn't too high. And also, this is more of a question, what is the smaller level interaction you can have with citadels these days? Or is that smaller level interaction in other parts of building your empire? So ESS is like I mentioned.
I think it's funny that you kind of already hit on so many of the issues with this feature, even though you've been away for quite a while. Because one of the things that pretty much everyone is agreeing on right now is that this will be almost meaningless and a non-issue to the big null blocks, which is actually who would be most relevant in the design. And who is going to be pushed out is basically going to be anyone that cannot field 50 to 100 dudes to actually defend their structures, right? Because now you have an incentive to just completely blanket war deck and just roll over all these little guys. Usually I don't talk about defending the little guys because I think the argument is usually moot. But in this case, this is definitely going to be the conclusion to this feature if it's done the way that it looks right now. Because you get so much bling coming out of it compared to the investment of, well, time and money on war decking, that it's basically going to be a rumble stomp, right? It also has a few other things. The fact that Ratati insisted that the fixed NPC price on this thing on ISK alone was a good thing. I would counter that and say that is completely wrong, because that means that it is not sensitive to any sort of price development in the future. It's not sensitive to us increasing to, say, twice the amount of players, or let's say half the amount of players. That is the benefit of having something player built. That means it always keeps up with what the activity level is in EVE Online. So there's just so many things about this that a lot of the players don't like, but I think ironically a lot of the players likes the premise, the core idea of having something in the game that does the function that the cores are supposed to do. They just do not like the way that it's presented right now in the dev block.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the design pipeline, right? Like, it's, have you correctly identified the problem? Have you correctly identified a potential solution? And then have you considered the secondary, tertiary, then on effects of your solution? Like, it does sound cool, and it gives a reason for people to shoot each other, which is always a good thing. And when it comes to the small guy, the way I tend to think about that in EVE and in games of this kind is, let's say, let's consider the progression of the smallest corp in the game turning into the biggest alliance in the game. At some point along that progression, you will need to start using the Citadel system in order to function, right? Like, there will be, in order to do more than we currently do, we need to start using an Astrahus with this new core in. Now, the question I think that's really important is how big is the group, and to the point that they need to use an Astrahus? What activities do you require an Astrahus to do, and what is your expected size and prosperity of a group that is just getting into their first Astrahus? And then, is that core a reasonable investment for a group of that size? If it's too cheap, then you've kind of wasted your time. If it's too expensive, then that group is never going to really be able to reasonably get an Astrahus, engage in that new gameplay, and start to engage in Citadel gameplay. So then that just becomes a hard barrier for the growth of groups. So fine-tuning that number of cost, I think I would look at that size group in order to consider price. And then in terms of changing price over time, that's far more complicated. I mean, technically, I kind of have a qualification in something not too far from that kind of thing, but inflation, tying things to the price of Plex. One thing about having a fixed price is that numbers, as much as it's a meme, numbers are easy to change. Like, if it turns out a year from now they're not expensive enough, you can add a 0 on the end. Like, uh, obviously that's simplistic, but you see what I mean. Like, the as long as the price is approximately in the correct ballpark on release, I wouldn't. That's low down on my list of concerns.
Well, it's on my concerns because historically we haven't really had any changes to most NPC costs in Eve ever. This includes, of course, the LP store and all that stuff. So it's never really caught up with what you would call inflation or the productivity and speed of printing ISK. So
that's a broader issue, right?
Well, yeah. But the point is that I don't like it because it's a flat thing, and it's like, okay, let's say that we sink a lot of ISK out of the system right now, and that might be good on some level to counter the extreme ISK printing, and it might take out a few trillion from the big boys, but it's just really not useful, right? Because it only does this effectively right now as a single moment in time, retroactive tax on ISK and on logistics. This is basically quoting Dunk Dinkle. And this is one of those places where, or one of those times where, when I agree with Dunk Dinkle, someone should kind of pay attention, because it doesn't happen that often. And the amount of people that do not like the iteration that we're looking at here is so massive and so broad. I think when even the people that benefit from this the most doesn't like it, I think it's clear that we need to revisit it and get another pass at it, because, well, Willy, who is running the TTT in HiSec, that is going to be the one group that is going to benefit from this massively, doesn't even want it. Then I think we need to really go back and do it over. Because it's about bottlenecks, right? It's about putting some sort of roadblocks in front of this massive use of these things for the wrong purposes and where they never get cleared out. So it's really those two topics. Let's see how we can make people not want to just spam them everywhere, and let's see how can we get someone to actually want to destroy them when they're not being utilized, or groups that really shouldn't have it might actually be the owners of them, right? So abandoned state. But we got the abandoned state. So this is something that could be partially solved just by adding some meaningful fueling on it, right? Something that needs proper maintenance and upkeep depending on something like activity levels. And when it comes to the source of these cores, if it is at least partially player made, then the industrialists and the market people and the activity levels in EVE Online will supply and find the right price point, unless of course it's again comprised of things that are way too easy to source and where we can just brute force it into almost no cost. But again, the fact that we saw that CCP hadn't even considered that this is going to be a massive problem from wormholes just shows that it was a little bit rushed. I don't know if CSM has actually had proper eyes on it. No one will confirm or deny that from the CSM, of course. But I would just suspect that this is something that the CSM would have said, I think we need to talk about this a little bit more, because this is not landing in a good place.
I mean, do they have a proposed like release date, or is it this is a thing we are thinking about, please talk about it amongst yourselves? Well, this isn't like, oh, by the way, this is in the game tomorrow, right?
Well, it's going to be seeded on the 8th of this month. That's very fast. That's like crazy fast. That means they're already dedicated to launch it.
So next week it's on TQ?
You can buy it next week, yes.
Yeah, I mean, like I said with the Titan stuff, it's like it's a momentary impediment that delays the problem. If it's purely an ISK thing, if it is exclusively adding a greater upfront cost, then all you are doing is temporarily slowing down the inevitable spam.
Yeah, it's a temporary speed bump, and everyone, well, I'd say 75% of the player base will be able to cover this fairly easily. Again, a lot of people said, "Oh, but I can't pay this," and as I asked them, well, you could pay the cost of one of these structures. How can you not pay another 30, 40, 50% of the same cost? Of course you can. It's not going to be a problem. You're going to do that faster than it took you to actually put this up, because you're already established. So the only people that are really going to hurt from this are the ones that are going to be targeted when that blingy thing is inside this structure. And of course, then you can say, well, you're not entitled to housing in EVE Online. Maybe not, but it's one of those nice little achievement things on the path to some sort of accomplishment, right? Feeling that you've done something, feeling that you have something that's yours, putting a little flag in your little moon, right? That's visible, that's in space, that you can sit and spin like you spin your ship. I think people are entitled to something like this. I don't think it should be something that's just completely obliterated off the map, because, unless of course this has server issues. If this is completely straining and strangling the servers, I might be okay with it. But if it's just to create destruction, it's not going to achieve that goal, because it's still not a real incentive. It's just a blingy morsel.
If I remember correctly, just as I was starting to take my break, they introduced a thing with citadels where if nobody touched them in a while, they went low power. And then they were like super duper easy to mop up. Like you just go and blow one up, right? To what effect did that have?
Remind me.
So a citadel. I don't know if this is still in the game or if it was some hallucination. If you do not maintain it in some way, it went low power, and then it would lose all of its timers, and you could like 1 or 2 cycle the thing. Basically, it was if you didn't play with your toys, it was very easy to take them away on a citadel level. Am I wrong here?
I don't think you're entirely wrong. I was just trying to follow chat, because people keep mentioning this whole ISK thing, right? And this is where I get a bit annoyed. It's not that I have major beef with the economy team, but I don't think they understand a simple term that a lot of EVE players don't understand: opportunity cost, right? If you put this into the hands of the player base, the time that they will invest in building one of these, with all the logistics of actually gathering the resources, and if it's complicated enough, the strain can be potentially a lot higher, but it's not going to be perceived as high. That's the difference. You can actually take these prices as they are now, put more value in man hours, and it will be more acceptable to the player base, because they still fundamentally think that playing the game is fun. That means that they don't necessarily care that there's a massive opportunity cost. This is why you still have people doing the, if I mine it, it's free. It's not, but to them it feels like it, and that's enough. Perception is reality. So you can have these things create so much more gameplay. They will still be shipped around. They will still be droppable. They will still have all this economic activity, and not just be an ISK sink. Because when you're sinking man hours out, that's something that can continue for a long time. And the whole ecosystem of these things, especially if they're also recyclable, so you can kind of get some raw materials that's actually going to save you man hours instead of give you ISK up front. It's just a better system. It creates more in the sandbox. ISK in, ISK out creates no activity in the sandbox at all.
Would you like to hear my radical economic idea about games in general, but as it applies to EVE?
Indeed.
I think EVE would be a far more interesting game if there was more of a functional limit on how much ISK a single about how much ISK and resources a single human, not a count, could produce. Such that if you wanted to become more rich, it's not a case of spending another hour in your local belt or anomaly. It's you absolutely must interact with a different human being to yourself in order to acquire more things. So I'm not saying that there's some kind of counter where, oh, you've got the 10 mil in your wallet for the day. That's it, young man. Like not that kind of thing, but where your personal wealth increases not by additional accounts mining the same anoms more, but such that you have to interact with other people to acquire that wealth.
Well, funny
Now,
enough,
to some extent, that's impossible. To some extent, and it's always going to be a sliding scale. It's not a binary, but I'd be far more interested. I think it would be a far more interesting game, even though it's wildly more difficult, if that limit was more on your interactions with other people than with how many accounts and how many man hours you put in the game.
But that is what it used to be. When you're talking about things like industry and market PvP, that is exactly the reality of those types of gameplay. Because there is a limit to, well, you start plateauing on at least some of the faucets in EVE Online. So if you want to scale that up, you have to start interacting with other people. Because when it comes to market PvP, you're at least interacting as a competitor with another dude. And it's the same in industry. You're trying to maximize your stuff, and if you can do it better than him, well, you're going to be making more money. And that's a really hard aspect of PvPing without actually shooting someone in the face, because very small things can actually make you lose that game, because there is a winner and a loser. When you're talking about faucets and sinks, then there's no real loser, right? It's only winner all the way around.
Yeah, I mean it's a real hard game with real hard things to balance. That some things are made impossible. Like, one of the difficult things about EVE is, how do you distinguish between a different human being and a different account on a game design level? Like, to an extent, you can't really. Human beings themselves are limited to only so much activity. So, you might be able to quad box Titans, but you can't really 16 box Titans unless you start getting bots involved. And, the constant war against bots is always a good thing. But yeah.
But interestingly, one of the things that you mentioned about interacting with other players will be a potential outcome of this, right? Because this is an example of something where now there's skin in the game and now you win something. This is similar to, I remember reading an article a while back from Elizabeth on INN that talked about the profitability of PvP, and the fact that if you make it so that next category of income stream requires you to actually compete with some other player, so you have to kind of steal their stuff to get the next level of more stuff. That is actually a direction of exactly what you're talking about. This boosts potentially PvP. This is one of the things I like about the cause, that it can do that. This is also why I like the idea of trying to shift something like the loot mechanics to be more incentivizing towards the people that shoot other dudes in the face, right? Because you should shoot other dudes in the face instead of rats. Rats should be something that has so much of a diminishing return that, as Apothne just pointed out, at some point it's just not valid anymore. You don't get anything when you've shot the thousands of one rat. Maybe that's where it needs to go. Put it on the activity tracker. If your account has shot more than 1,000 of these, you don't get bounties for them anymore. Just a suggestion.
I think that's difficult, right? Because you don't want people shooting each other to be a sum ISK in the game. So, say I have a thorax and my friend has a thorax, and we shoot each other and one of us wins. There should not be more ISK in the game than before, because otherwise people can abuse that mechanic. And then ratting, the way people rat, will be involving like the least loss possible. And that would always be an inherently more ISK in the game profitable activity. So
you're not getting
difficult.
more ISK from loot. If I shoot you in my thorax and I win, I get your loot. I do not get any ISK printed into the game. I only steal what's already in the game.
Yeah. Yes. But in terms of value added for the player, whether that comes as ISK or commodities, one thing I think would be super interesting would be giving Alliance. So this would be insanely difficult and solved by the players. But one thing that would just, Magical World be super cool would be is if heads of alliances who own the space. So, you own Alliance X and you own these 20 systems in this region. If you can make more decisions that fundamentally impact the nature of that space, not just does it make money or does it make more money or does it make less money, but if you make a decision and no matter what you choose, it will piss someone off, that would be fantastic for the game. So it's having choices such that none of them are necessarily just mathematically the best, so everyone will understand. But having choices where you have two choices, they don't necessarily both have to be bad, but whatever you choose, you're going to piss someone the hell off. That is, broadly speaking, in social games, a really good thing. And I don't know how I'd implement it in a very specific way, but I find those mechanics very interesting. Like, having systems where everyone can be a winner, which tend to be not fun. And that's kind of the complaint about the blue donut, right? Everybody wins more or less, but that also just means that everyone's angry. Like, we need more reasons to not hate each other, but like there need to be more reasons where if I had that job, I could make decisions that work better for me and the people I care about. Because this person having that job and making those decisions make me not good. So I have a reason to go over and kick over their sandcastle and put on that crown. And that goes all the way from lower levels to higher levels. Like, because people are outside real friends, more and more people are far less bastards to each other in the game. Like, I desperately want like far more internal civil wars that are actually meaningful. Right? There's drama and there's posturing, but at the end of the day, the leaders of the alliances for the last however many years are the leaders of the alliances for the last however many years. And having more mechanics than focus on forcing people to screw each other over would be wild.
But that would require an actual lose condition, and we don't really have that in current Eve. It's almost all already replaced, right? So without and this is something that I always get a little bit frustrated with. Why is it that people are so afraid of losing? Why do they not acknowledge that losing, if at the right time and under the right circumstances, can actually be an entertaining aspect of the game? Maybe not at the moment, but in hindsight.
I think that the reason for that, not the losing part, but for the reason it's so hard in game, is that the only way you can have that as real loss is to introduce hard server limits on how much of something that can happen. So say, we live in a magical world where if you have a Titan, you must dock it in a citadel. And a citadel can only hold 50 Titans. I'm not suggesting this. This is an example for purposes that will come apparent, right? So the obvious solution to that problem is have like more citadels than you have a 50th of Titans. The only thing I know of that exists in the game like that is the Palatine Keepstar. There can only be one active on the server. There can only be one. So you're not limited by accounts. You're not limited by money. It is, if you want a Palatine and someone else has built it, you must go and ruin someone's day. And because you can have as many accounts as you want, you can do as many things as you want, and in many ways having that lack of limits is fantastic. I think the only way to have more meaningful conflict in many ways is to have more server limits on certain things. Now, obviously, that can go very wrong very quickly in a very bad way. But I think that is the number, like if CCP were to whip out something and put it on the table to show they mean business, it would be there are only 10 of these in the game. Go fight over them.
Yeah,
Alliance tournament ships are a decent example, but they don't work a lot of the time because
and
they're
it
more
doesn't work
collector's
in a
items.
game. It does not work in a game because if you're adding actual hard limits, I agree with you on principle. It's just that there are better ways of creating a mechanic or an algorithm or things like loot tables that react dynamically that will lead to the same thing. It will create a limit, but it will be a soft limit. So if you need to scale it, you can still do it. But if you put this hard limit saying 200 Titans done, that's just not good for a game, because a game, you can't really tell how many people are playing, how is it changing, are we doubling the amount of players in the game, or are we halving it? It needs to be something that is responsive and more like an ecosystem. It's fine if
Oh yeah,
something
I
overshoots,
totally
but it never
agree.
needs
I
to
was
clash.
making a harsher example for the purposes of making a point. But like belts regenning every day. As an example, what if belts regen every week? But that just means that you're incentivized to spread out more on the dominant player. It's hard to then overcome truly dominant systems, right? So like we always say that the bigger guy always wins. So like if you have a group, the classic example is the Imperium. If the Imperium needs something, the Imperium can go damn well get it because they've got the assets to go and do it 99% of the time.
A funny fact from real life, right? You know how grass grows in the real world. This is something similar that we should really have from a mechanic design when it comes to something like respawns of roids, right? They should be conditional on how they are grazed. If you graze them too hard, they don't come back until they've had a period of fallowing. This is exactly what we need in EVE Online. If you completely strip everything away, the respawn rate should go down. And if you leave them, they should go up. So you're basically nurturing and working them like real living things. And if you tie all these things together, so how much you strip or don't strip, how many rats you shoot or don't shoot, all these interdependencies can be coded in a way that does not need really complicated algorithms. A lot of these are very, very simple algorithms. It's just that they are usually three-pronged, right? If you have everything just being exponential brute force additive stuff, it just explodes and overshoots, and it's going to be toxic. This is the kind of design that we've had in EVE for quite a while, but there's never been any negative feedbacks. We have very few negative feedback systems and very few diminishing return designs, if any.
I completely agree with you on that point, and that's where that happy ground is. And I want to address something Blody in chat said. They said you only encourage blobs with this, everyone will join the side that gets access to that. But that unfortunately doesn't work. So to use the hard limit example again, say there's this thing of which that you inherently that the people want, and there's only 50 of them. So then everybody joins the alliance that has all 50 of those. That doesn't actually help you, because if there are 2,000 people in the alliance, the 50 favorites gets that thing. You being in that alliance does not change your access to that thing if you're not one of the chosen 50, right? In the same way that if we have, say, the diminishing returns on mining and the anomalies, which is kind of the more realistic but more fluid solution to that, which is the more realistic and better one, is if you're in a massive, massive, massive alliance with tons of people, congratulations, you have your 5 minutes allotted mining time for today for everyone to have an equal thing. And like it should be a limit such that it is reasonable for an individual player to go, this 5 minute allotted time is not enough for me. Fuck the other guy, fuck the next guy in queue. I'm going to take his mining time, and I'm going to take the mining time of his after that. In fact, us 10 guys, we're going to band together to have the strength to take this one rock or this one anomaly, and this is all for us. You can't have it anymore. so that, you know, is where you get more incentives to break apart the large blobs. It's by having those limits. It's by having things that people cannot share, that players cannot share ad infinitum.
Yeah, and on that kind of high level ecosystems, economy, and game design note, I think we should sort of close the show for today, because we've been going for quite a while. And
sorry, that's my bad. I don't know if you had other topics you actually wanted to discuss.
I definitely contribute to the long streams, but in 15 minutes, I believe CCP is going to stream, and they're going to have one of the Eve Echoes devs on there and talk about the future and the development phase of Eve Echoes. I don't know about you guys, but I am definitely going to watch that. So I think we should wrap up and say thanks to Apothne for coming on and filling some amazing content on the stream, and then see if Matterall can find the off button. And also a huge thanks.
I'm back. Are they actually going in 15 minutes?
They should be going on in 15 minutes, yes. The 1800 UTC, I think, was the time set for
Why don't you take
CCP
it
stream.
to 1800 and we'll just raid?
Then I'm going to let Apothne freewheel for a bit, because I need a fresh coffee like right now.
Oh, great. It's my platform, which I definitely haven't just had for the past however long. Like, I was actually, for a lot of while I was talking, when I first joined the call, I was still technically finishing up at work. Working from home is a blessing. So to be more armchair game designers, and if any CCP devs are still watching, I want you guys to know you have my utmost respect, and I do not think I am smarter than you. This is a thing this is a thing I find interesting, and this is a thing that a lot of people, it is their actual job, and there are so many like political limitations and time and all these other things that we don't know, but it's interesting to talk about, right? And interesting to think about, and interesting to share our experiences. So it's a positive passion thing. We're not I at least personally am not like going, oh, if only CCP did it this way, then the game would be good. Aren't CCP fucking idiots? Terrible at game design. We've got literally the worst people possible. Like, no, I don't think that. Like, this is really fucking hard stuff to do and get right in amongst like having a successful business and existing in the capitalist hellscape that is the world we live in. Yeah, just
to help you out a bit,
positivity.
We don't like that at TIS. We try to stay away from judging CCP's brain power, and we just want to analyze the things.
So going back to what I think would be fun, is I do kind of just want to have a small group of like 10 to 20 guys go and poke people's citadels for like response fleets. That was always my jam, right? It was like 20 to 30 guys at most, maybe as few as 10 to 15. You go a few systems into null or low, you find like a mid to largish size group that can't just instantly drop 1,000 super capitals to the point where you can't engage. And you just poke. They make a response fleet. You poke each other for a bit. You exchange some volleys. You both go home. You both had a great time. And my introduction to Eve was actually as the other side of that, right? Like when I was in Eve Uni, it was defending those high-sec wars. High-sec wars, people complained about so much. I loved high-sec wars. We would get war decked by all these people, and yeah, they'd fly kitey stuff. But, you know, you'd have the one Unista who'd been in for a little bit longer and thus could fly a recon, and you'd try and catch it, right? And, the ships were so cheap. Like, it was really good fun. And that, for me at least, that is the Eve gameplay that is above all others for me. It's the 20 to 30 people poking something, and then that something responding in a way that you can still engage with, and you don't just have to hard leave. And this is a lot about an article I wrote both on my old blog, and then I rewrote it for Crossing Zebras when I worked there. I think I called it like wolf and sheep, or like engagement windows, or on engagement, something like that, where it's about knowing what you have and finding targets that are the right size for you, and will react and will. It's too far to say playing the game in good faith, right? Because I shouldn't expect other people to play the game I want them to, but it's having a culture in your section of space, or having enough people in the game who play the game the same way as you, but not on your side, such that you can have those enjoyable moments together. Like when I was in PL, we did these Deimos fleets to poke kind of like mid to small size groups. Like we had a few fun fights against Test because, say I remember one fleet, I think Test Rage formed like 2 Jackdaw fleets. No, not Jackdaw, 2 Sveeple fleets. And I think they had a Caracal fleet going around that ended up joining as well. And we were in like 30 guys in Deimoses and support. So, between the numbers, the size of ships really came into it. And, we were dodging these Sveeple fleets and they were running at us and we were kiting away and there were the engagements. I remember another time I ran these Deimoses for a while. They were really fun. They weren't very good, but god damn it, they were fun to fly. And I can't remember. I think it might have been some Russian group in like the Northeast, in that little passageway that used to be owned by Brick Squad back in the day. This is many years after Brick Squad. I just remember it because that's where I went in uni days. But that was in PL now. And they formed like 100 ruptures and other mixed stuff. And we kited those ruptures. They'd occasionally catch a few of our guys. And we'd be running around in circles trying to catch them. And it was like edge of your seat. Not small gang, like mid gang skirmish piloting. Like that. Like if anybody's got an opening in a group that does that all day, that will let me do dumb doctrines, I sign me the hell up, basically, is what I'm saying.
That sounds like some initiative stuff. But a side comment to what you were talking about, remind me to poke you when I get around to actually planning a Circle of Life special stream where we can talk about really nerdy things like ecosystems and Locke Volterra functions and all that stuff, because that's really what you're talking about right now. You're talking about overpredation. You're talking about the whole predator-prey dynamic and how this works in an ideal world, and on a very practical sense of the examples you just gave. But the problem we have in EVE Online right now is that we have not just overpredation, we've pretty much reached a lambs to the slaughter design where we just scare them away or kill them. There is no good Circle of Life dynamic anymore. It's really, really suffering.
Yeah,
Oh,
and that's partially,
what do you
and that
mean?
is to an sometimes within player control, and sometimes it isn't. You got to consider who you are as an entity, and this also goes back to what I was saying before about what you put in the game is what you get out. So if you are a group that really, so say you're a group that has a bunch of space and that's where you live and you mostly control the region. If you hard crush with all your assets, like complete overwhelming response, small fights that come into your area, they're not going to keep coming into your area. And then, another thing is you start at a good level, but you're like, we'll just take a couple more logi than them because some bullshit reasons that I'm scared of losing. So we're going to take a couple more logi, which in my mind means it's still an even fight. Or like, it's only a slight advantage. The other groups, oh, well, we need to, in order to even the odds, also bring a bit more logi. But they might do the same thing. And you get this arms race, which happened a lot in low sec when I was in Waffles when we were in the north, where it was like T1 cruiser brawls all day, every day. It was amazing. It was the best time in game I think I've had, when it was Tech 1 cruiser brawls in Cal faction warfare. But then people started skilling into hacks. People started skilling into T3s and battleships, and then it was Guardian Proteus, full tanking, like massive cost of entry. You don't really want to lose any fights, and it's just like you got to be so careful and so willing to lose. And but also you don't want ground rules because that removes some of the fun. Like I think it's really not fun to talk to an FC in another group and say, hey, we'll meet in this system and have a fight at 7 p.m. tomorrow. I think part of the foreplay, if you will, of running a fleet is going out and organically finding those groups rather than prearranging it. And again, this is all just what I find fun. Like this doesn't matter to literally anyone else. But going out on a roam and just finding those things if you're in a chord rather than pre-setting them up, having them be organic, having that, as I say, foreplay of scouting and knowing your area and what people are likely to bring, but without actually talking to them and pre-arranging it, having that mystery of ship comps you don't quite know. And, you know, that's something you lose by playing the game for a long time. Once you've got the skill points to fly those big expensive things, once you've, you know, done it for long enough, you've solved the game. And that goes back to something Elise said a while ago, is the game would be so much better if everybody that had been playing it for more than 5 years quit. And I think there's some truth to that. But again, it depends. It depends on so many things and what you want from the game.
You actually wrote an interesting post that I think about now and then, and that is the people who are commentating on shows aren't really playing the game anymore. What do you mean by that?
Sorry?
The guys that are commentating on EVE Online? Remember?
Are you saying that's something I wrote about?
Yeah.
But it's a known factor, right? I do think you can comment on it even if it wasn't your article, because it is a known effect that the longer you play EVE Online, the more you risk ending up disconnecting from the client, because you move to the next meta layer, the next meta layer, the next meta layer, and unless you are an FC, you will end up being in a position where you are directing, organizing, reading, analyzing, doing doctrines, all manner of stuff, doing third-party coding, doing website management, writing articles, teaching other dudes. It's like it's always going to disconnect you from the client because you end up using more and more hours on those things, right?
I think that those are the people that should not be making the decisions. I want the person making the decisions to be someone who doesn't know what they're doing. Like somebody who is up and coming. Like I want the people in charge to be people who still have something to prove and still have something to learn.
That doesn't take away the problem of time. Like if you end up managing 500 dudes or 1,000 dudes, or God forbid 20,000 dudes, right? There's not that much time to actually play the game. You're going to have to rely on people that will tell you if things have changed in a certain direction, or basically get eyes inside the clients that help you out, right? Because you're making decisions based on their intel, and this is really where you are upgraded to almost like a real life manager. This is what management is all about, and then the skill sets that you're going to acquire when you reach that point is completely and 100% applicable in the real world.
I think it's this one I have on screen called All EVE Media is Bad. It talks about how people making the EVE media are like ex-players. Or they're
I think I was making a
touch.
different point in that article, but that's definitely an article I wrote. You have to remember that so many of my articles were written in a stream of consciousness between like 3 and 5 a.m., sent off to an editor to stop every paragraph being a single sentence, and then they got published. So like, you know, and also I'm doing exactly the thing that I say I hate, like to an extent. But again, it's that, what do you want from Eve? What do you want from Eve? Why are you here? I think what I was complaining about there was people who didn't care anymore or weren't willing to do certain things having those spots. Like I want the people with passion, the people who still want to achieve something, being the prominent people making decisions and stuff. And I think I was also angry at what I call like not apathetic nerd syndrome, negative nerd syndrome. I don't know. When you're like, oh, this is shit, that is shit, the game is shit, but we're still here. I know, fuck that shit. If you're not having fun, fuck off. If you're not having fun, absolutely fuck off. That's what I did. I fucked off. I wasn't having fun in EVE anymore, so I fucked off. but I'm looking at coming back and trying to have fun again. Yeah, play the game if it's good for you. If you're not having fun, go away. If you're gonna have fun again, great, come back. But if you're not having fun, change something.
Yeah. What was it that said, if you never leave, you can never make an entrance?
That's true.
But I think about this because I use it as a means test, like, or a test saying, am I out of touch with what I'm talking about? Am I just hanging on? Because I see it all over. Like, it wasn't an untrue observation.
Yeah, and as you're scrolling down this, I remember that there was a time where I was doing so many shows, and I was still in, and I only really wanted to talk about the stuff that I was actively doing, but there were so many people who had run shows and written articles for so long that you couldn't feel the passion anymore. It felt so mediocre, and it felt like we're doing the show for the sake of the show. Doing we're not talking about a thing we care about anymore. We're not like excited anymore, and that's so sad.
But you can almost make the opposite argument as well. Being disgruntled is also a little bit of a feature, right? Because it means that you still care, right?
Oh, if you're
Because
fucking angry about something, hell yeah. If you're pissed off and you're like, fuck this thing because I want this thing and blah blah blah, that's great. I'm talking more like, well, this is kind of bad, I guess. It's the complete loss.
because apathy is what kills us, right? This is what makes people quit the game: apathy or complete burnout.
Yeah, apathy and burnout is the thing, and it ties into self-care. I'm moving out of the game. One of the things I really want in modern society is for people to learn how to do mental and emotional self-care more, because everybody will be so much happier, and so many fewer people will vote Republican. Sorry, it's not a political show. No, that was a joke. It might be true, but it was a joke for the purposes of this show. Like, yeah, man. So what I said before about playing a game that you want to be in. Like, I want to play a game where everybody is super passionate, super excited, super engaged, super involved with what they want to do. And it might be that they're super passionate about casually logging in once a week and mining, but that's their jam, and they're super happy about that. In order to play that game, in order to achieve that state of the world, I need to be one of those people. So want if I'm only interested in Eve Media with people who know what they're talking about and who are still super excited about the game, I cannot produce Eve Media if I am not part of that group.
I mean, it's not in your bones.
Yeah, man. Like, I switch hobbies when I have less fun with them. Like, I think everybody moves between hobbies, right? But there's a part of you that needs to know when it's time to move on. Like, I did Dofus into Diablo 2, into StarCraft 2, into EVE Online, into LARP as like my really, really big hobbies in life. And each time, sometimes it took me a while to realize it, but it was just time to move on. It was time to do a new thing for whatever reason. Doesn't matter what the reason is, but that's partial human nature of being afraid of change. It's partially momentum, it's being comfy, and it can be for 1,000 reasons. But it's just, again, as I said before on the show, self-awareness. Know who you are, know who you want, know what you're excited about, and know how to have fun and be happy in whatever you're doing.
All right. One last thing. You're coming back to RP. Never thought of working with Minmatar?
Yeah, Mimitar are great. They're slightly icky from a lore perspective. Like, I'm really uncomfortable with, in a lot of fantasy settings, groups that draw too much from real oppressed minorities. And then, as a white cis guy from the Western world with a lot of privilege in my life, then role playing that can be a bit gross. But I would need to look into the Mimitar more to know whether I'd feel icky playing that. But it's certainly possible.
It's hilarious. Elaborate on what icky means.
Oh, icky, it's like slang for like gross or disgusting. Like, you know, when you like touch something a bit gooey and then your skin crawls, like, oh my god, that was disgusting. That's something that feels icky.
Right. But about a person with privilege playing a slaved class.
Yes, I mean the main thing is you want to do it in a way that doesn't cause problems. So like, in fantasy and fictional settings, it is very easy and not necessarily always bad to draw inspirations from the real world. But if you are doing so and pulling culture from cultural groups that have suffered over a long time, then that falls into cultural appropriation, into um, lots of disrespect, and you got to be really careful with that, right? So like,
Yeah.
playing in a game where slavery is a thing is not inherently bad. Like, I wouldn't necessarily feel uncomfortable playing as part of an enslaved class in a game in some settings. But if you pull a ton of tropes from one particular culture with no respect for that culture, and you're doing a caricature or a parody, and you're not playing with an awareness of the inspirations that you're taking and how it might look to people who have experienced that, who then want to come and play the game with you, then that's really gross. Please don't do that, right?
Mhm.
So a classic one in fantasy settings might be taking inspiration. I mean, there's a group in it's not as bad, but I'll use it as an example. So I play the Empire LARP system, which is the biggest Fed LARP in the UK, and there's a group called the Brass Coast, and a lot of their stuff is culturally taken from or associated with like North African peoples, like that bit of the Mediterranean. And the majority of the time, that's super cool. That's super fine. But if you play into certain racial stereotypes that aren't part of the brief of that, and if you aren't aware of the harm you might be causing certain people by doing that, then that's not good,
That is
right? Like
very,
it's
yeah.
an extension of like say blackface as an
Yep.
example.
I get where
Like
you got. That's
guys,
why.
like people listening, if you didn't know, don't blackface isn't okay. It's
That's
not
why I
okay.
asked you. But we'll pick it up a different day. We're going to move over to CCP now. Good talking to you, Apothne.
Sorry.
No. I want to actually probe this topic, but another time. So thanks very much, guys. Say goodbye.
Later.
Bye bye. I only just got back, really.
I almost put in the shtick about the fact that watching the Viking show makes me feel a little bit culturally appropriated.